This episode is brought to you by Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels and music are made for each other. They share a rhythm in the craft of making something timeless, while being a part of legendary nights. From backyard jams to sold-out arenas, there's a song in every toast. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Jack Daniels and Old No. 7 are registered trademarks. Tennessee whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Jack Daniel Distillery, Lynchburg, Tennessee.
When it comes to what your family eats and drinks, you know your choices matter. You're the expert because you know what fits your life. And getting it right starts with good information. That's why America's beverage companies are sharing more information about our ingredients at goodtoknowfacts.org. No spin, no judgments, just the facts straight from the experts for more than 140 beverage ingredients. Visit goodtoknowfacts.org.
Hey everyone, it's Mary. Before I get started, I got a fun request for you. We have an upcoming Plus segment where we're going to be talking about Halloween, specifically whether it is possible to do a topical Halloween costume this year and have it be fun. We are already getting amazing calls from you all, but if you haven't had a chance yet, you can still weigh in. Give us a call on our voicemail line. The number is 646-582-0091. That is 646-582-0091. All right, here's the show. I'm not sure if you've been scouring any satellite imagery these days, but if you were, and if you had honed in on the corner of the Caribbean between Cuba and Central America, Brian Winter, the editor-in-chief of America's Quarterly, he can tell you what you'd find there. Ships and sailors. Lots of them.
Right now, in the Southern Caribbean, we have, by one estimate, about 10% of the U.S. Navy right now, broadly speaking, in that area off of Venezuela's coast.
10%? That seems like a lot.
It's a lot.
You might think you know what these ships and sailors are up to. After all, in the last few weeks, there's been one strike after another on small boats that the U.S. government claims are smuggling drugs. But Brian says, this is not all these military vessels are up to. There are just too many of them.
It is the largest buildup of U.S. military in this part of the world since the invasion of Panama in 1989.
I mean, to me, this military buildup feels emblematic of a real focus on Latin America in this presidency. Does it seem like that to you?
Yes, this is the White House that is most focused on Latin America of any White House in at least 30 years.
There's a way to make what's happening in Latin America make sense, according to Brian. You could argue that many of the president's domestic priorities, which include stopping illegal immigration and drug smuggling, rely on gaining the upper hand with our southern neighbors.
I'm not giving my personal endorsement to any of this, just to be really clear. I'm an analyst whose job it is to understand what's happening in Latin America and why. And look, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, famously the son of Cuban immigrants, very focused on Latin America, knows the region, has spoken with its leadership. But it's not just him. The number two at the State Department is a man named Christopher Landau, who was the U.S. ambassador to Mexico during Trump 1, who grew up in Latin America and actually went to high school in Asunción, Paraguay, and speaks silky smooth Spanish. So if personnel is policy, as people in Washington are fond of saying, this is an administration that is kind of across the board ready to deal with the region in a way that we haven't really seen for quite a long time.
That said, it's worth questioning how exactly the Trump administration is trying to deal with the region. After all, at the same time the American military is targeting motorboats off the coast of Venezuela, calling Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro the leader of a drug cartel, down in Argentina, the approach looks very different. The president there has been called Trump's favorite. And now Trump has authorized tens of billions of dollars to bail his government out. If you had to sum up the Trump doctrine in Latin America, how would you do that?
That's hard. It's hard even for somebody who's tried to spend the last year thinking, like really focusing on what they're doing. And, you know, the lament in Latin America for the last 40 years has been the United States doesn't pay enough attention to what's happening down here. And many have joked in the last couple of months, well, be careful what you wish for.
Today on the show, Trump takes on Latin America. Who is getting bailed out? And who is getting bombed? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Okay, let's look at these two countries and what's happening there to just kind of understand the broad brushstrokes of how the Trump administration is operating in Latin America. I want to start with Argentina. Let's just start out and explain how we got to where we got, which is we've just extended this $20 billion bailout to Argentina, specifically to Argentina's president, Javier Milei. He was elected in 2023. He's been a strong ally of President Trump. So there's definitely a little bit of a, we're samey here. Tell me a little bit about how he came to power, who he is, and why he is so spiritually aligned with the Trump administration.
So if we back up just a bit, Argentina 100 years ago was one of the world's 5 wealthiest countries. And at some point in the middle of the 20th century, things went off track. And it is today, not nearly as wealthy as it used to be, kind of the middle of the pack in terms of its development. One crisis after another is the country of Evita Perón, of this terrible dictatorship that governed between 1976 and 1983. And more recently, really troubled, even by its own standards. 7 recessions in the last 10 years.
And Milei's whole platform was, I'm going to fix it, right?
And Milei came along and said, I am the solution to your troubles. He, prior to his campaign, was a little-known economist who was sometimes on television. And then he started to gain some fame a few years ago when he came on television and started giving advice about tantric sex.
Okay.
This is actually true. This is true.
Okay.
And people started paying more attention, and people became more interested in his economic ideas. And then, look, there's a serious part to this, too, which was Argentina was kind of nosediving into another one of its bad periods. And you had inflation that got above 200% a year. I mean, we freaked out here in the United States when inflation got to 9%. You can only imagine what 211% was like. And so in those conditions, people started, and tell me if this sounds familiar, they started looking around for a politician who was different.
Yeah.
And who wasn't like all the other politicians, and who tells it like it is, and who might seem a little crazy, but, maybe it's the crazy person who you need to solve your problems. And Milei combined all of this with what actually at its core was a very orthodox economic message, because he was, after all, an economist. And he said what we really needed to do is cut spending, because that's the essence of Argentina's problem. And I happen to believe, and a lot of economists happen to believe, that he's fundamentally right. And so upon coming to office, he has done that, and inflation has fallen, and it's now in the 30s on a 12-month basis, which is to say,
still pretty high,
much higher than we are accustomed to, thank God, here in the United States, but vastly better than it was. Argentines have felt the difference.
So where did it start to go wrong?
The story has been more complicated over the last couple months, as you referenced. The real economy continues to not grow at the rate that people hoped.
Well, he's cut funding for infrastructure, for education. He's fired government workers. This would sound familiar to people in the United States.
Well, and it has a clear short-term, at least, recessionary impact. And what Milei would say is, well, we can't continue to spend with, giant budget deficits forever. It was those deficits that were causing the inflation. But you're right, the impact on people's lives is real. And this is why, especially with these corruption scandals that have broken over the last couple months, Argentines are so outraged.
Yeah, the corruption scandal that sort of tipped things over in Argentina involved the president's sister, right? Who's also part of the government. She was accused of receiving kickbacks, and she was involved in a cryptocurrency bribery scandal.
Well, there are all kinds of allegations, all of which she denies, and courts have so far not found her or anybody else guilty. But the political impact of this has reverberated throughout Argentine society. And people who have been asked to make these sacrifices over the last 2 years are looking at these scandals and saying, so I have taken my kids out of private school, or I have had to sell my house, and now I'm hearing these allegations that the president's sister was on the take. And so in a lot of ways, that was the worst thing that could happen to him. His sister, Karina, is also not only a family member, but effectively his chief of staff, and therefore someone who is very important within his government.
So what is this $20 billion bailout from the U.S. supposed to do for Argentina?
Well, it might be as much as $40 billion if you kind of believe what the Treasury Department is currently saying. And essentially the purpose of this money is to buy time for Argentina. It is to prevent them from sinking into yet another wave of crisis that could permanently impair President Milei's ability to govern.
I mean, there's also reporting that the U.S. investing in this way might have a significant impact on U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's friends and colleagues who are heavily invested in Argentina. Is that part of the picture here as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of reporting about that. I think that's a fair criticism. I would also point out, though, that Wall Street tends to be on both sides of these bets. Like, if Scott Bessent's history is personally so wrapped up with Wall Street that he probably knows people who were betting for Argentina as well as people who were betting against Argentina. That's how Wall Street works, right? Like, there's always people on both sides. So I personally think this is more about a desire by the president to help an ally, to show that not just in Latin America, but globally, that there can be great dividends paid to those who show adulation and cooperation with the Trump administration. And I think they also believe that it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to turn back the left in a country like Argentina, where they see the left as a clear threat, not just there, but everywhere.
If Javier Milei was not who he is, was not someone who had intentionally kind of fashioned himself after Trump and Trumpism, would he be getting this bailout he's getting?
That's a fair question. I mean, there's no doubt that Donald Trump has called Javier Milei, quote unquote, my favorite president. Javier Milei was the first foreign leader to visit the United States and see President Trump.
He stood on the stage with Elon Musk and the chainsaw.
He did. And you know, what the United States is doing right now with this package for Milei is very unusual. We've only done it a few times in our history. Usually this kind of aid is channeled through the International Monetary Fund. There is no way to detach what's happening in Argentina from this personal affinity between Milei and Trump. It is explicitly an attempt to reward an ally. But I would note, in the interest of fairness, that many governments have done that over time.
Can you make the argument in favor of this bailout to someone who pays taxes in the United States and might see it and say, what is in this for me? Like, I get what's in it for Donald Trump, which is you establish another ally in the region, prop them up. I can see what maybe is in it for potentially Scott Bassett and his friends. But what's in it for me, American citizen, who is actually providing the $20 to $40 billion here?
If I was to dutifully state the case in favor of this bailout, I suppose I would focus on stability in the Western Hemisphere. This idea that if you have countries like Argentina that are economically strong, then you'll have countries that won't be exporting huge numbers of migrants in the same way that Venezuela and Haiti and Cuba did in recent years.
Because people will stay in their own country.
Yeah, because people will stay. And look, this has been a big pitch of Javier Milei and his allies. They've said, if you vote for us, we will ensure you, voter, that your children and grandchildren no longer have to leave.
How much should we be talking about China when we talk about this idea of investing so heavily in Argentina? Because it seems to me that part of what's happening in Latin America is very much about China.
Mary, you hit on the other big element here. And you're absolutely right. That is a huge part of the Trump administration's calculus as well. So much has changed in the last 20 years. China is now the number one trading partner for countries including Chile, Peru, Brazil, Uruguay. It's number two for a bunch of others. It's made huge inroads, has become a huge investor in areas like infrastructure. They just opened up a big new port in Peru that could radically change the way that Latin America trades with Asia and with China specifically. So, Beijing has really stepped up its game. And the Trump administration does seem to believe that if they can support allies like Milei, who are sympathetic to them, that they can kind of beat back part of this Chinese advance.
After the break, how the Trump administration is taking a very different approach in Venezuela. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks makes it easy to find the perfect gifts and holiday looks that suit your personal style. The holidays can be a whole lot of things. Fun, relaxing, but also a little stressful because you've got a long list of friends and family and you gotta find a gift for everyone. If you go over to Saks.com, I guarantee it's going to jumpstart all of your ideas for what you should be getting your friends and family. It is the only website on the internet where you're going to find super high-end luxury Prada sneakers next to a crystal floral A-line gown from MacDougall. And then that's right next to a Cynthia Rowley ombre long-sleeved wetsuit. These are things I did not know existed until I went to Saks.com. And now I'm like, maybe I should be getting a bathing suit for my mom this Christmas. Maybe. Going into this holiday season, I feel confident Saks is there to help me find inspiration, curate a holiday wish list, pick out gifts for my loved ones, and have a look ready whatever might come my way. Whether it's an office holiday party, a cozy night in, or a vacation getaway, Saks has got everything you could want. If you're looking for shopping to be personalized and easy this holiday season, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to shop for everyone on your list.
This episode is brought to you by Planned Parenthood Federation of America. The state of reproductive rights might feel bleak, but the fight isn't over. At Planned Parenthood, they're holding the line, no matter what. Whether it's birth control, wellness exams, abortion access, cancer screenings, gender-affirming care, or expanded telehealth, Planned Parenthood continues to provide care, even now. Some lawmakers are trying to end abortion access, slash funding people rely on for care, and shut down Planned Parenthood health centers. These attacks only deepen the healthcare crisis they created, putting millions at risk. But here's the truth. Planned Parenthood has been there for over a century because of supporters like you. Planned Parenthood believes everyone should have the freedom to make decisions about their own bodies, no matter what. And that's something worth fighting for. The future isn't something that just happens. It's something that can be shaped. Planned Parenthood needs you in this fight. Donate today to support Planned Parenthood at plannedparenthood.org/defend.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise, or wherever you listen.
Okay, let's turn to Venezuela, where things look pretty different than they do in Argentina. I think my listeners will be familiar with the fact that for weeks, the U.S. military has been striking boats off the coast, claiming they're smuggling drugs. They've killed dozens of people. We don't know a lot about who is on these boats, but we know that there are competing claims. Some people saying fishermen, some people saying drug smugglers. Can you walk me through exactly what's gone on over the last, say, 6 weeks?
It's a very large U.S. military presence off the coast of Venezuela. So far, kind of purposefully ambiguous about why they're there. We have everything from destroyers to vessels that could drop small amounts of U.S. Special Forces, for example, on the Venezuelan coast. We have that capability as well.
And Trump seems to have authorized the CIA to operate within Venezuela.
Yes. But here again, this makes me think that at some level, it's not exactly a bluff, but it's an attempt to scare the Venezuelan military. Because if you were really interested, hypothetically speaking, in conducting some sort of special operations within Venezuelan territory, I don't think you would have leaked that to the New York Times. And when this did leak to the New York Times and President Trump was asked about it like hours later in the Oval Office, he immediately confirmed the story. And this tells me, or at least it suggests, that, again, part of the purpose of all of this is to scare the Venezuelans. And look, I would love to see democracy return to Venezuela. But I've also watched over the last 10 years as attempt after attempt from the outside world to engineer that change has failed.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Venezuelans seem to think that what's happening around and in Venezuela could be a way towards regime change. Like we saw opposition leader Maria Corina Machado get the Nobel Peace Prize. And as she talked to news organizations about that, she was incredibly deferential to President Trump in a way that almost seemed like she wanted him to keep doing what he's doing as a way to keep the pressure on the person she's trying to defeat. Do you want to explain that a little bit? Because it was really quite striking. She said President Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Well, I suspect that the Venezuelan opposition, there are definitely some people who love Donald Trump, and there are some others who see him as potentially means to an end. And while they may be in their hearts uncomfortable with the idea of some kind of foreign intervention. And some of them may even believe that it might it might backfire essentially and put the goal even more distant somehow. I also think they sense that this may be a once in a generation opportunity for change. And for Maria Corina, winning the Nobel Prize put her in an incredibly uncomfortable situation because Donald Trump wanted that award. You may have heard.
He's mentioned it a couple times.
Yeah, just a few. And I can only imagine, like, the moment of happiness at receiving this very important recognition, not just for her, but for the cause of the Venezuelan opposition. But then, like, half a second later, her kind of grasping her head and thinking, oh, God, this puts me in such an uncomfortable position with Donald Trump. And, look, I will say this. There are leaders all over the world right now who are modulating themselves, trying to either curry favor or at least avoid the wrath of Donald Trump, and doing so in ways they never would have believed possible and that probably make them in their heart of hearts extremely uncomfortable. We'll read about it in the memoirs later. But for now, these are leaders who, are trying to do what they have to do. And for Maria Corina, she doesn't care so much about the Nobel Prize. What she cares about is freedom for Venezuela. And if Donald Trump can help her with that, then by God, she will do what she needs to do to keep that man happy.
Yeah, it's interesting, though. I mean, I guess from my perch here, right, in Brooklyn, I see this and I see all of these extrajudicial killings, which seems like a terrible cost in terms of human lives with very little accountability. And then when I see someone like Maria Corina Machado coming forward in this way, I just think like these killings are happening. And it seems to me like Donald Trump is kind of grooming a next generation of leadership that will be allied with his belief system, I guess. Do you think that's a fair concern?
Look, I think the risk of a backlash from all of this is real. A backlash not only in the United States and in Western Europe, but also, perhaps more importantly, within Latin America itself. Latin America is a region that is just as polarized between right and left as we are here in the United States. But one of the few kind of red lines that almost everybody can agree on is national sovereignty in a region that over time saw intervention after intervention by the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so the possibility that in the desire to cultivate allies, or even potentially with more noble intentions in mind, that the Trump administration could do something or say something that causes a huge backlash that would be counterproductive to the goal of, say, Venezuelan democracy, that possibility is very real. And maybe we're seeing that unfold already with this U.S. military presence in the Southern Caribbean.
So if you're another country in South or Central America, just watching how the last few weeks have played out, what are you thinking? Are you already kind of adjusting your behavior and expectations from the United States?
Look, I would note that so far the region's governments have been pretty quiet. There has not been much backlash yet, even from governments on the left, such as Brazil comes to mind. There have been some statements, yes, but not a huge outcry. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is there's not a lot of sympathy for the Maduro dictatorship around the region. I also think that there is a fear among many governments to speak out because they know that they could wake up tomorrow morning with 50% tariffs if they do. And I think people are watching this very closely. And if we see the United States, for example, send missiles into Venezuelan territory, meaning on land, as President Trump has over the last few days been threatening to do, and many analysts think is imminent literally at any moment now, something like that could happen, then I suspect that you will see a new wave of reactions that could be stronger than what we've seen up until now.
Yeah, because I mean, the other thing that I see is you can't really speak out about what's happening in and around the waters of Venezuela. Like we just saw this weekend, Colombia's president accusing the Trump government of murdering fishermen in one of these boat strikes. And the reaction was quite swift. The U.S. government said, new tariffs for you, no, no more aid. And we'll see how that all plays out, right? But it is creating this very strict regimen of incentives and disincentives in the region.
I would acknowledge that there's a bit of a history there, that the Colombian president and President Trump have kind of had it out for each other. So far this year, back in January, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, sent a tweet at 3 a.m. in which he ordered that a deportation flight that was bound for Colombia turn around in midair. And they've been kind of sniping at each other ever since. But look, I mean, we're all adults here. And it's true that this is a White House that does not like criticism and that will use whatever leverage it can to try to help allies and prevent its adversaries from speaking out.
So if I called you up in a year or 2 years, I just don't know what your thinking is about where this is headed.
Well, I've been following the region for 25 years, and my job is to look at things with a bit of a cooler remove, as you say. I would also say that it's a region that is itself changing and where it seems like the pendulum is swinging to the right in many countries. There's a big cycle of elections that we're in the middle of right now, where Ecuador earlier this year reelected a conservative president. Bolivia has just elected a president who is pretty centrist, but who's replacing one of the hardcore left socialist regimes of the MAS party. And if you look at the upcoming elections in Chile, Colombia, and Peru, these are all elections in which the right is favored. So, I would say many people in the region have these deep-seated objections that you're describing to what the Trump administration is doing. But people also have other priorities. They are worried about organized crime. They are angry in several countries that I've just mentioned, at what they see as the left's mismanagement of economies over the last couple of months. And so, as incredible as it may seem to some people here in the United States, Latin America as a region may be even more aligned with President Trump a year from now than it is today.
Brian, I'm always grateful for you. Thanks for coming on the show.
I always enjoy it. Thanks so much.
Brian Gunther is the editor-in-chief of America's Quarterly. Before I go, a quick reminder. Yesterday, I asked for your best Halloween costume stories. I gotta say, you guys are already delivering on those. But if you have not called in, now is the time to do it. The main question I am looking to answer is whether you think a topical Halloween costume is actually doable this year. Why or why not? You can weigh in by leaving a message on our voicemail line. The number is 646-582-0091. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Paige Osburn is the senior supervising producer of What Next and What Next TBD. Mia Lobel is the head of audio here at Slate. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. Say, hey, I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.
Doug. Here we have the Limu Emu in its natural habitat, helping people customize their car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Fascinating. It's accompanied by his natural ally, Doug.
Limu, is that guy with the binoculars watching us?
Cut the camera. They see us.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.